Welcome everyone to Textiles and Tea with the Handweavers Guild of America. I'm Kathy Group. I'm the advertising and marketing manager for the Handweavers Guild, and I get to be your guest today. I get to be your host today. Today we are sponsored by the Weavers Guild of St. Louis, and again in memory of Dorothy Haddock. We have a lovely picture of Dorothy here. Thank you, St. Louis. This is a lovely thing to do to honor one of your own, and we appreciate you sponsoring Textiles and Tea. As always, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. If they're in the chat, I can't really see them, and we want to see all your questions. Please put your comments in chat. We love those, but let's get to Q&A. Put your questions in the Q&A. Today, we have Venancio Aragon. He is a weaver who weaves on an upright tension loom. And this is a technology of an indigenous origin. He views his loom as a powerful connection to culture, identity, and history. He says his quest to learn and preserve his people's technical traditions has led to an ongoing journey of piecing together fragments of memory, oral history, and archaeological materials into his work. His textiles draw on ancient techniques once developed for utilitarian needs and purposes. He fuses bold geometric designs with polychromatic saturation to reflect his individual and technical freedom of expression, and you will see that today in his work. He views his tapestry as a living record of the cultural survival of his people and as a testament to the current vitality of his heritage. Each tapestry he creates is a unique not only to him, but to the genre of the Navajo textiles his work is descended from. Thank you so much for being here today. We appreciate you coming.
Thank you. That was a great introduction. Thank you.
Oh, before we start, please say your name, because I know I've butchered it, and I'd love to hear you say your name the way it should be pronounced.
Well, the proper pronunciation here in New Mexico, the V would be a B sound, so it'd be Venancio Aragon.
Venancio Aragon. Not even close, but I'm trying, right? Well, let's start off with a really important question. What is your favorite tea? And I can't wait to see that mug. I saw it earlier. It looks awesome.
Oh, yes. I don't really have a favorite tea, but I'm drinking right now turmeric tea. But if I did have to choose one that I probably consume the most, it'd probably be Navajo tea. And it's wonderful because it also is a dye as well.
What's it made out of?
It's a plant called kota. And Navajo, we call it chilohuehe.
Okay.
So if you're in the Southwest, you definitely know what this tea is.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a great mug. Is there a story behind that mug?
No, it's handmade by a local Navajo artisan here in New Mexico. Other than that, it's no real story behind it.
That's a pretty good story right there. It's beautiful. So how did you get started in fibers?
Yeah, I am descended from a long line of weavers, dyers, and spinners. I inherited the craft from my mother and her mother, and so on and so on. So it's part of our collective history and culture as Navajo people to be involved with fiber arts.
How do you think you were when you first started weaving?
I think, let's see, maybe sixth grade, seventh grade, something around there.
Wow, wow.
And now I'm 37. So
Well, this first question is pretty direct because it's such an issue these days. So, what is your definition of a Navajo weaver?
yeah, I think first of all, we all utilize the sort of definition that many of my elders say, and that a Navajo weaver is a Dene person, a Navajo person who weaves actively. And this doesn't just mean the loom itself and the techniques that we inherited from the holy people, but it means also the spinning process, the dyeing process, the animal husbandry aspects, and the knowledge associated with the ecology of finding the dye materials and the mordant materials and so on. So to be a Navajo weaver in our traditional worldview, I think is an encompassing thing
Mm.
that it really relates to this idea of self-sufficiency we inherited from our elders, that you do everything yourself with the help of your family, and that's how you provide for yourself. So and the other aspect is, like people who are non-Navajo people that weave on a Navajo style loom or do Navajo style tapestry. I think there's a lot of room for discussion to be made about, are they doing Navajo weaving or are they doing Navajo style weaving? And so that's, another, whole box that we can open up later or not. I don't know. But yeah, in general, I think for my own people, a Navajo weaver is a person that actively weaves and does all those other aspects associated with the production of a textile.
Well, you have stated that, and I said this also in the bio, is that you've combined the tradition of Navajo weaving with your own more modern approach design. Would you talk some more about that?
Yeah, so growing up, like the most common thing for other weavers in my area was to go to the trading posts. That was the main outlet for exchanging textiles for goods or money, right? And so a lot of times those trading posts had a big influence on the styles that were being produced by weavers. And if colors variated out of those regional styles or were sort of gaudy or viewed as non-traditional by the trading postmen, they wouldn't be purchased. And so that outsiders had a big influence on the styles that people produced. And for me myself, I found that to be something very strange that people had such an impact on what we were weaving. In our own culture, our own cultural teachings, weaving is an outlet for your inner creativity. It's an outlet for your thinking thoughts to manifest physically in this form of a loom of the warp and weft. And so for other people to, change the way you think or the way you express yourself is definitely not something that is part of our traditional culture. So in my way of weaving these bold colors and sort of non-harmonious symmetries, it's my sort of tackle at decolonizing this idea of what a traditional Navajo weaving is meant to look like.
Yeah, I think that's a point of view I've never thought of before, or wasn't aware of, is the impact of kind of the middleman would have on the work that you do. The other thing I was curious about is that this kind of a more personalized or more flexible approach to the weaving style, is that more accepted by younger weavers? And do you get any resistance from older weavers?
I don't know. I think in general, I mean, I can't speak for everyone. I haven't met all the weavers out there, but I think in general, I think a lot of weavers like myself that are in the younger generation are really into experimental weaving and sort of breaking the boundaries of the regional typology. And yeah, a lot of older weavers, I've heard, things, very good things from them about my work. And it's just reinforcing what I stated earlier, is that in our traditional culture, the weavings are manifestations of our thinking. And so however we think, however it comes out on the loom, however we're different is accepted, because that's how the holy people created us.
Mhm. Your colors are so saturated. They're beautiful, as and shown in this work and then the next slide. Is that have you always used intense colors? Is that something that you started with, when you were 7 or 8, or did you develop those as you progressed?
I started in a pretty mute palette. I was using a lot of earth tones like black, gray, white, brown. And then I got into dyeing and learning more about the dyeing processes, not only of my own people, sort of as a recovery project, to learn all I could from my mother. And if I encountered other weavers, I would ask them as many questions as I could. But the natural palette only gives you so much of a range. So I started, researching beyond the borders of my people's homeland and looking at what other cultures were doing. And so, I found dyes like cochineal, madder root, indigo, turmeric, logwood, and so on. And I started to incorporate those into my weavings as I would be experimenting and learning how to use them. So yeah, I started in a very sort of muted palette that was very sort of common for weavers in my area. But eventually I was doing so many of these dye experiments that I had all these colors that weren't matching, that were mixed up. And so I had to find ways of using them. So I started making these polychromatic pieces, or in the style that I called the expanded rainbow aesthetic. And eventually I wanted more and more colors. I became a collector of colors. And I started to experiment with synthetic dyes as well, using whatever I could from supermarkets. I'm talking things like Kool-Aid or RIT dyes, but I'm a bit more refined these days. I use a lot of Jacquard acid dyes and different synthetic dyes that are available on, to most people on the internet.
Well, can we talk a little more about this piece and the previous one, but we can just look at this one. Can you explain what this is? Because there's a reason why we showed the front and the back. So can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, this particular technique is called tufting. And in the old days, people wove these for saddle blankets or for the actual cushion that a weaver would sit on, or even as bedrolls for people to use. So it's a technique that comes from a utilitarian past. And usually it was Angora goat hair, Angora goat locks that were inserted into the weft on the entire front of a piece. So it'd be all covered. But, my mom would tell stories when I was young about her mother weaving these pieces for saddle blankets for my grandfather. And my mom never wove them, but she would tell me these stories. And so from her recollection of the technique, we were able to reconstruct it. And then I started making them. But of course, I had to go in my own direction and do my own thing with them. So yeah, it's called tufting, and they can be on plain tapestry, or you can combine them with other techniques like the twills and so on.
And both sides are beautiful. That's what's so nice. They're just gorgeous.
They're usually not shown like in museum or art venues. Usually you just see the tufted side, but the back side is so dimensional as well.
Mm-hmm. That's gorgeous. You did a fellowship at the School for Advanced Research, and you did research during that time. And what do you think was the biggest impact on you personally and you as an artist in finding all the research that you did there? And also, let me back you up a minute. And can you explain to people what the School for Advanced Research is?
Yeah, the School for Advanced Research was formerly known as the School for American Research, and it's in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And it's just a hub of it's an institution that provides, different scholarships and fundings and research grants and things like this for scholars and academics and artists to come together and, dive into topics for a longer period of time, deeper than you would at other institutions. And it centers mostly on sort of anthropological research, archaeological research, cultural history, and things like this. So yeah, it's just a great place. You could look it up on the internet and learn about it. but I was very pleased to be invited to be part of that fellowship there. And my fellowship was to look in the Indian Arts Research Collection. They have, I don't know, hundreds, maybe thousands of Navajo and Pueblo weavings. And I was looking through their collection for any pieces Navajo manufactured that were techniques beyond just plain tapestry weaves. So any kind of weird twills or two-faced weavings or tufted pieces. I was wanting to look at those and identify if we haven't documented that type of technique before in literature. And so there was one piece I found there that was an extremely beautiful twill. You can watch it on YouTube. The culmination of my research, just go to SAR, School for Advanced Research, and type in my name, and you could learn more about it that way. But yeah, and the other part of my research project there was to record those pieces and create conventions or drafts so that other Navajo weavers could recreate them if they so choose. And the problem that I ran into in this was that there's no standard convention or terminology that is used by Navajo weavers to record how we weave. So that was one small thing, but also putting these techniques into the public domain is something that was a little challenging for me too, because it goes back to that notion of cultural appropriation and maybe as Indigenous people, our long history with anthropologists and ethnographers misusing the information that they've extracted from our communities. So I didn't want to just publish widely, these drafts that I created so that anybody can do it. So I'm working on a way of getting these things to Navajo weavers specifically.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, I do encourage people to go look up, and maybe we could get it in our chat, because it was an interesting article. I really enjoyed reading it. And again, it made me see things from a different point of view. So we'll get that in the chat so people can look that up too. I've asked this question of a lot of people because when I was in school, it was a big issue. So, and I'm always curious to see how artists will talk about this. So for you, which is more important, process or product?
So again, I go back to the teachings of my elders, and they would say that the process is the more important part of weaving, because when you're weaving, you're actively, manifesting your thoughts to create beauty into the world, right? And that process is more important than the final piece. I think, though, in the sort of capitalistic society that we live in today, thinking about time and materials and costs to make a living, for the products you create, people might say something different, but in our old way of thinking, our old culture, it's the actual weaving process that is something that's, of more importance. And I think I follow that tradition as well.
Well, speaking of tradition, one of the things that I was really struck about when I was looking at all your work is how much, not notoriety, but how much you've been able to get your work out there. And I know for most artists, that's so hard. And I really wanted you to talk some about, you were in exhibits, and then we've got a screenshot from another thing that y'all got to go see is this Spider Woman's Web. It's a documentary by Cloudy Ridge Productions. It's a beautiful, beautiful documentary. It's very informative. And I was impressed by how you're working really hard to get your work out there on your own terms, it sounds like. So how do you do, every artist wants to know, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, first, the Spider-Woman's Web film you can watch on Vimeo, the streaming platform, and it's in the public domain, so you don't have to pay anything to see it. As far as, my journey into the digital realm and using the internet for marketing purposes, I guess it started a few years back when the pandemic hit, and the Santa Fe Indian Market was attempting to help their artists to launch a digital platform to have websites of their own. And so that's where I got involved with the creation of my own website. And just recently, last year, I got onto Instagram for marketing purposes as well. But yeah, I don't know. I think as an artist, not as a business person, but as an artist speaking now, you put your heart and soul into pieces, and if it's something exceptional, I think it gets noticed by different people, and the universe works for you in that sense. And so a lot of the exhibitions and things that I've been privileged to be part of, I was contacted by people that recognized my work as something important, I suppose. So, I don't really have an easy answer for how to get yourself out there. I think if you go on, YouTube and look up tutorials about online marketing and things like this, you can probably find people more knowledgeable and more tech savvy than I have been. But I'm just a humble follower of an ancient art form, and the gifts that come back to me and return to me are gifts from the holy people. And so, you have to respect your art form and respect yourself. And I think things fall in line that way.
Well, this exhibit is beautiful. Now, this was in Tucson, right?
Tempe.
Tempe. Sorry,
It was
Tucson.
at the
Sorry,
Tempe Center for the Arts.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. One of the other sayings that I've heard over and over again, especially from a fiber point of view, is that sheep is life. Would you explain what this means for not just for the Navajo people, but also just for you personally?
Yeah, well, in Navajo, the saying is the Pepe Ina, sheep is life, right? And I think it once again relates to our traditional economy of self-sufficiency. And that was something that our elders always taught us to do, is that you're the one responsible for yourself. So without, in the old days, it was, you were engaged in animal husbandry, you were a shepherd, and you would take care of those animals, water them, shear them, give them medicine when they needed, protect them. And in exchange, they would give you, these useful things, the meat, the milk, and the wool. And it is said that, when you don't have sheep, it's like you don't really have self-sufficiency. If you don't have a way of producing food for yourself or growing food for yourself, you don't have anything. It means you're kind of like poor in a sense. And so sheep is life is relating to this idea, is that we as Navajo people, we drew so much from, the animals that we tended and cared for, and they got us to the point that we are today. A lot of people think that we wouldn't have survived so much of the colonial history, the settler colonialism engaged against us by the federal government, if it wasn't for the fact that we had these resources like the sheep at our disposal. So it's kind of something very important to our culture that we survived the way we did because of these animals that we cared for, and in turn, they cared for us. But I think in a globalized sense, it's sort of this idea of interconnectedness. And I think today, many people are so removed from the food production centers that they don't really know where things that they're eating come from, or what it's like to raise or grow food themselves. And so, sheep is life. You could say that for a lot of animals, for people, in Africa, you could say cows are life, for herders in that region. And in Asia, you could say chicken are life, because people eat a lot of chicken, poultry, and pork. So I think it's just this idea of relating to these resources that you draw from the earth, and how you should respect them, because without them, you really don't have any life.
That's true. That's true. I grew up on a farm, and I was surprised when I went off to college and people were like, oh, that's so cruel. And I thought, well, in some ways we treated our animals better because, like you said, we honored them for what they were going to give to us, rather than, abusing them and not taking good care of them, because we knew their role in our lives. So that's a good point about, you got to honor them too. I have heard you talk about the lack of designation between art and utilitarian work, and I loved that. And we've talked about that often on this program. So would you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, once again, I think going back to the teachings of my ancestors, right? It's a theme here. It's like the basis of what we know. But in our old culture, this notion of art kind of, I guess, maybe didn't exist so much because art wasn't separated from everyday things. Like everything that, Native people created, whether it was Pueblo potters or Navajo weavers or, jewelers, it doesn't matter. Whatever you were creating for everyday use was designed with beauty and purpose in mind. And so art as this sort of abstract thing, I think is sort of maybe a modernist Western notion applied to some of the things we produce. So yeah, there is kind of a separation in thinking about it. Utilitarian items versus art forms, how useful is something in your everyday life, how beautiful is something in your everyday life. And I think we've sort of separated those things, but in our old culture, there was no separation between things that we used and things that we made beautiful.
So what's next for you?
Yeah, well, I just finished up with the Santa Fe Indian Market in August, and that was a good show for me. Both my mother and I sold out very quickly on the first day, so we have to replenish our stock because our next big show is going to be the Herd Museum Guild Indian Fair and Art Market in Phoenix, Arizona, and that's in March. And in between all that, I'm working on a few commissions to catch up on and general fiber prep and things like this. So yeah, so life is good. Things continue. We're always busy. It's a big cycle of weave feverishly, fiber prep, and go sell your stuff and do it all over again. It's a good problem to have.
It is. That's a great problem. Well, we have questions. Let's go to some of our questions, if that's okay. Janet Medina says, I'm curious as to whether you've ever faced any resistance from others because you're a male weaver. And she said, your work is beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think so. No, I haven't personally. And this is something that in maybe the SAR video on YouTube I address a bit more, is that, in Navajo weaving, predominantly was done by women, but there was no big emphasis that it absolutely has to be women. In our traditional teachings, the art of weaving was taught to us by both Spider Woman and Spider Man. And so we have, no big problem with it. But I think it was until sort of the Western colonialism and Christianization of many weavers that we saw this idea of division of labor by gender, that somehow in the Western thinking that weaving was predominantly in the realm of females and it was women's work, it wasn't manly to do. But if we look in our history, we have many notable male weavers in Navajo culture and among the Pueblo people as well. Weaving was done by both sexes. And I think today, sure, it might be something that people might say something about, but, we are, undergoing a period of decolonization, and we need to bring back those views from our older culture and separate, what the impositions were from Western colonialism on us, the thinking about gender and, who's able to do what, So yeah, I've never had a problem with it.
I can't imagine it that you would even let it be a problem for you. You seem to be very clear on who you are and what you're doing. So,
well, thank you. Some days I'm not sure.
Andrea Thyssen said, is tufting knotted in like Ryan technique? Do you know the Raya technique?
Okay. Yeah, I do. It's not at all. No, it's not. Like if you pretend my fingers are the warps, are the warp threads. Tufting is where the locks are inserted around the warps, and they're not knotted at all. And then, the packing of Navajo weaving with the hand comb, the batten comb, it makes it so tight that these tufts have a hard time coming out. So they're not knotted at all. Yeah.
I think the only tufting I've ever seen is with a gun. So I'm not real sure how they're done without the gun. Oh, somebody wants to know about the video access for spider web. We put that in the chat. So if you want to click on that, you can see how to go see that documentary. It is very good, very wonderful. And they want to know, do you have an Instagram account?
I do. It's Aragon Textiles.
There you go. All right. Gail Dixon says, beautiful, joyful work. She loves your work. And Sarah Jean Burke said, your ideas are to be honored and respected. We should think about our ancestors, but will we win or lose our own ethnic battles based on what we do for our descendants? We are defined by what kind of ancestors we choose to be. Boy, isn't that the truth? Oh, this is a good question. Do you work on more than one project at a time? That's a good question.
I do occasionally. I mean, I have several looms up in my studio. I usually try to do one piece at a time, but as a lot of fiber artists out there will probably tell you, you get distracted on something, or if it's some piece you've been working on for a long time and you just need a break on something else, you definitely will do that. But in between weaving, I do a lot of spinning, and dyeing and working in my garden. So that's for me is other projects.
Thanks, Carol. Good question. Lee Daly said, nice to see you here. I loved your exhibit and visit at the Montclair Art Museum in New Jersey last year. Karen LeBlanc. Hey, Karen. I love your connection to your ancestors. Oops, lost her. Are you aware of other Indigenous groups who are involved in weaving and fiber-related work? She said she taught weaving to a group of Mi'kmaq women when she worked for an Indigenous organization in Eastern Canada.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we're talking Indigenous people globally, there's tons of weavers. But if we're talking just in the United States, I think most of the surviving cultures that actively practice weaving, that it's like a big part of it. Navajo Nation, of course, and some of the Pueblo peoples in New Mexico and the Hopis in Arizona. There are other types of weavers, like if you go up to the Northwest coast, but people might argue that those aren't true looms that they're using. It's more of like the twining techniques and so on. But yeah, there at one time there was plenty, but today, yeah, it depends on where you go and how many there are. But the vast majority of weaving probably being done today is on Navajo Nation and associated Southwest peoples in New Mexico and Arizona.
Karen also, and I asked you this earlier too, so, she loved your work and said, do you offer courses? Do you teach?
So yeah, I don't personally teach Navajo weaving to non-Navajo people. That's like my personal choice. And if there are any Diné people, Navajo people there that want to learn anything from me, I'm willing and open. But I personally view Navajo weaving as an important part of our cultural history, and it deserves to be taught and learned. But personally, I view it as Navajo intellectual property, and it's part of our cultural patrimony. So if people are interested in learning spinning or dyeing, I teach that to anyone, but specific techniques as only to my own people.
I think I asked you, do you teach dyeing? You said you would teach dyeing. Right?
Yep, dyeing I do. Okay. Yeah.
Well, that leads to my next question. Somebody wants to know, Anne-Marie Mullen wants to know, do you have a dye garden? Or you just go find it somewhere?
I have a little bit of both. I mean, in my yard, I try to grow things. Like this year, I grew tons of marigolds. Yeah, but there's a lot of things that you can harvest locally. And so I have a garden that is for eating. And some of those products I utilize as well, like the carrot tops, the greens of beets and so on. Yeah, I don't have a garden specifically for dyeing. They're just kind of intermixed with whatever vegetables I grow.
And somebody else says, do you harvest cochineal? But I don't think cochineal will grow there, will it? It won't.
Not where I am. You have to go further south, like the Phoenix area where it's like warm all year. I get where it's too cold for those little bugs. So I harvest them on Amazon.
Ooh, you're brave. That's scary stuff.
I saw a question from one of my dear former teachers, Patty Savanna. Did you see that one in the questions?
No, where's Patty? Was she in text?
I think she was.
Where are you?
Let's see.
Maybe she was in chat.
It popped up and then I missed it, but I knew it was from her. Let's see here. Right here, Patty Savanna to everyone. Hi, Patty. It's good to see you. When I was at the University of New Mexico in undergraduate, I took weaving classes from Patty, and that was a life-changing experience that I don't really get asked about because people don't know about it. But Patty is one of the most amazing and influential people that got me to where I am today, along with my mother, of course. But yeah, just learning techniques from Patty and her love of the craft and her willingness to share things. It was just amazing. And so, hello, Patty. It's so nice to see you on this. But she asked, were the twill patterns woven on a Navajo loom developed independently, or were they adapted from European textiles? And then she says, please put your questions in Q&A. Okay, sorry. But I say we don't really know, because in the archaeological record, we see things like the diamond twill and the reversing twill being part of sort of this indigenous origin. And of course, Navajo people might have learned some of those techniques from the Pueblo peoples as we were exchanging these knowledges of textiles. Some things like the wedge weave, where if people don't know what the wedge weave, it's instead of weaving at the fell where it's flat, it's diagonal, right? And it creates these scalloped edges. Textile scholars don't even know where that originated from, but it appears to be sort of an in situ Navajo development. So we don't really know. And some people say like the two-faced weavings where the front and the back is different. Some textile scholars think that maybe that one was adopted from European textiles, like maybe a blanket that had that kind of two-faced or double weave was picked apart and recreated by Navajo weavers. So a lot of these techniques were not so certain archaeologically or ethnographically speaking. But in our old culture, in our way of thinking about some of the twills and the different techniques like that, they were inherited from Spider Woman that thought of all these things that taught them to us. So 2 answers there, sorry.
Great, 2 for 1. Patty also asked, is anyone in your family following your tradition of weaving? And that's wonderful to see you.
What was that? I'm sorry.
Is anyone in your family following your tradition of weaving? That's from Patty.
Oh yeah, I have a niece, 2 nieces that, they're both in college right now. So during summer breaks, if they come back home, they get to spend time with my mom or myself, and we help them out that way, learning more about weaving. So it's hard because, my mom was sort of like, no, I don't want to say forced to weave, but it was a part of their economy. And so if you didn't weave, you couldn't buy food or whatever, right? So she didn't want the teaching process of weaving to be like this as well. So it's kind of like hands off. Like if somebody is interested that comes along, one of our descendants, and they want to learn, we support them. But we're not like shoving it down their throat saying, you are from a long line of weavers and this is exactly what you have to do. We say, as long as you know how to weave, you don't have to actively weave, because when you have kids someday, they might ask you about weaving, so you just have to know it.
Oh, right. You could be the bridge too. All right. Well, Rebecca Smith says she's from La Cruces, and she was curious that besides tufting, do you do any other textures into your work?
Besides tufting, I wouldn't say, not really, no. Like I don't really do things like the sumac or knots and things like that. So I'm not really into texture. I think the texture comes for me mostly with hand spinning. And I'll use different fibers, like I'll use Navajo churro wool or merino or different kind of wools like that to give texture just in the yarn itself, in the spun yarn itself.
Well, Michaela McIntosh was curious about, and I guess this goes back to some of the research that you've seen. She was curious if the weaving, Navajo weaving, is different from the weaving from the early Spaniards. And I'm curious, has there been an influence between from the Spaniards when they came over in the weaving?
Yeah, so the first thing that would be different is the materials. The Spanish brought the sheep. So before that, Weaving in the Southwest was largely done with cotton, and you even use things like dog hair and bast fibers like yucca and wild flax and things like that. The technique itself of a Navajo loom is a 4 salvage closed piece. It's a continuous warp. And it's an upright tension loom. That in itself is a technique of indigenous origin. Spanish looms, colonial looms, they would be like large floor looms, basically, where the fringes are cut and there's, pedals and mechanisms to separate the warp and, so on.
Okay.
So yeah, so big difference. And I would say that the biggest thing that Navajo weavers took from colonial Spanish weaving would be designs. So if you see this piece right here, that's one of my mother's pieces. And if you looked at it up close, it's a lot of serrated fine diamonds. And so that would have been adopted. That is what we call eye dazzler patterns. But those would have been adopted from, Mexican and Spanish blankets like the serapes and the saltillo blankets. And so design maybe was one of the largest things that people incorporated from the Spanish, and of course the wool. But the looms itself, those are our looms. Those developed in the Southwest. Even the Navajo spindle, the hip spindle, that's a spindle of indigenous origin. You can trace it through the archaeological record. It wasn't like the drop spindles or the spinning wheels that Spanish colonists brought over later. So I hear that sometimes that the Spanish people brought the hip spindle, but archaeologically speaking, I don't think that's true. And a lot of people would agree with me.
First of all, I have to say that we all love Patty Savignac. She has been a great supporter of HGA. She's a sweetheart. We love her too. But now I'm going to tell you what she said, and you may not like her very much after this.
I don't think that's possible.
Okay. She said, I remember there was a spider web on your cradle when you were an infant. It indicated that you would be a weaver. At least she doesn't have pictures of you laying on the rug and all that, but that's amazing. That's great. Way to go, Patty. Mary Gerhard wants to know, speaking of spinding, and I know in the film you use a drop spindle, right?
Yeah,
what do you spin on?
Everything.
Okay. Well, that answered that. Do you have a preference? Do you like the wheel better than a spindle, or?
Well, I just sold one of my wheels because I had too many, trying to make space in my studio. But it's like different fibers, different techniques, different things, portability. So I find myself, the most apt with the Navajo spindle because that's what I grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
But I love spindles from all over. I collect them when I go out into the world. So I love drop spindles, mostly bottom world, none of this top world nonsense. I love supported spindles. I have spinning wheels. I have an electric spinning wheel. So, and a Jelligan from a Scottish spindle. There's supported spindles like a Tockley. I love using those too. So yeah, just anything. But I find myself always drawn back to the Navajo spindle. It's what I'm most proficient with.
I don't know if we can do this, but let's try. Betsy wants to know, can you show a picture of the spindle, the one that's native to the Navajo? Do you happen to have one handy?
Yeah, just 1 second.
Okay. Here we go again. I keep losing my guests. They keep running away.
Well, luckily,
Thank you for doing that.
Luckily, I decided to wear pants today. Here's the Navajo spindle. And you'll see the whorls are a little bit larger than drop spindles, and the shaft is longer, and there's no hooks or notches. And so, yeah. So this end sits on the ground, and the top end here would sit on your thigh, and that's how you would spin. Again, you can look these things up on YouTube, but this is my spindle.
Yeah. Did you decorate it yourself?
No, a friend did for me.
Oh.
Yeah, so I'm from New Mexico, so that's the Zia symbol. And these are the 4 sacred mountains of Navajo land, and the spider, of course, uniting us all together.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, again, go see that documentary. You'll see him spinning there. Good question. Thank you for getting those.
Yeah, thanks.
And I do too. Can you talk a little bit about the loom behind you?
My project going on now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm doing a series of saddle blankets. These are horse blankets, right? And they're all hand spun Navajo Truro wool and natural dyes. So I'm sort of deviating from, the color work that I'm doing. Every once in a while, I get sort of this itch to go back to these pieces that if you would see them, art collectors would see them, they would think they're from another time, an older time. But it's a hybrid between the two-faced and the diamond twill. And the blue are all different shades of indigo, and it's just black and brown, which are natural churro sheep shades, and white. And the blue is different indigo shades that I've created over the past year and a half that I've been working. And it's a four shaft technique, four heddles on there. Yeah, so you can see. And I'm getting closer to the completion of it, so you can see it there.
Wow.
Yeah. The
Is it a
backside,
twill? You may have just said this. Is it a twill or a plain weave?
it's a twill with
Okay.
the diamond twill here.
Okay.
And
I'm
the
sorry.
block-
Yeah, you just said that.
The blocks are the double two-faced, and the back
Wow.
is totally different than the front, which is kind of cool.
It is cool. And you went hunting for the indigo, right?
Yes, on Amazon.
That's going to be one of my all-time favorite statements from Textiles Tea, I think.
Well, I used to work for the National Park Service as an interpretive ranger at a lot of archaeological sites through the Southwest. And I always remember that, because I take my drop spindle with me wherever I would, you can walk around and drop spindle, which is cool.
Uh-huh.
And this lady one time, she asked, I was telling her, yeah, I use indigo for blue. It's one of my favorite dyes. And she looked around. We're in Southwest Colorado in Mesa Verde National Park, which is like the high desert, and she's like looking around. She's like, where do you collect your indigo? And I said, Amazon.
You have a very interesting background. I didn't know that about the parks. That's pretty interesting. That's why you're such a good speaker. You've had all this experience in it. Can you talk about your process for developing your wonderful geometric designs and how you decide to move your colors through the piece? Yeah, I love on the rainbow pieces, especially how they really move.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I have, like I said, developed this style over a lot of years, which I call now the expanded rainbow aesthetic. So basically, it's taking each component of the rainbow, each color of the rainbow, and putting as many shades of colors within purple and within red and so on, and weaving in those sequences. And the geometry just comes, it's, me playing around with symmetry and non-symmetry and maybe an idea. So like this piece that's up on the screen now is titled The Movement of Water. And it's my interpretation of trying to capture the erratic nature of water and how it moves. So the rainbow pieces I weave, they're based in a formula that I have worked out. I'll have each of my tubs of yarn organized by color and the shades. And so I try to weave within that shade going within the rainbow pattern, but the geometry makes it look crazier than it actually is.
I'm always struck by how people can put color together and not make mud, because I am the great mud maker. And you do this beautifully. They just work so well together without becoming boring. They're just beautiful and really kind of bounce off each other. The energy in this is amazing.
Thank you. Again, it sort of comes from the early days of when I was, like in high school, and I was weaving, and I took a few of my pieces to a local trader, which I don't do anymore. But the trading post man looked at it and he says, well, the ends aren't the same, and there's this weird purple color in there, and I don't think it'll sell because it's not traditional. And so I took my weavings back and I walked out and I never went back in. But those memories of my experiences in that system they continue to influence me today, is that, nobody should be able to dictate the discourse of your work. And, especially non-native people should not be, telling us what is traditional and what is not traditional.
No, that's why I laughed. I thought that is bizarre that someone's telling you you're not doing your tradition here.
It was very
That's
patronizing in a sense. Yeah.
well, good for you that you turned it around and you made it work for you. That instead of beating.
Yeah, and when I was at UNM in my undergraduate, and I was fortunate enough to take weaving classes from Patty Savignac, she had a big supply of I think it was Bartlett yarns. And there was some very beautiful colors in there. So I sort of dipped my toes into using these other colors a bit. And from there, I started dyeing my own too. So that was a big influence.
Way to go, Patty. This is a good question. How thin is the yarn you spin? She said no matter how much she spins, she says it's really thick.
I spin about a sport weight. But if I'm buying my own yarn, I buy worsted weight or Aran size. But on these saddle blanket pieces there, I spin they're 2-ply, which is something that's not very common in Navajo weaving. Usually people are doing a single ply. So I can't help it either. I spin pretty thin myself. And so I do about a sport weight. And then if I apply it together, that's what I'll use for my saddle blankets because they do have to be thicker and durable.
Do you ply different colors or do you do single colors?
Mostly singles. Okay. Mostly single colors. I did a lot of that stuff early on, and I have some older pieces that I did where I applied different colors. So it's occasionally I'll do that, but not often.
We'll talk some about the dyeing. Do you find that you dye mostly because you want a specific color, or is it more than that?
Yeah, I think it's just experiments because, as I've said before, I'm a collector of colors. And so I'll look at my yarns, and my pieces use about 150 to 200 distinct shades. And if I run out of one, I attempt to redo it. And if it doesn't come out the same, it's something different and unique. So yeah, I'll do a color. If I don't like it, I'll over dye them. It all depends for me, like what I'm looking for. And so usually I'm happy with whatever comes out of the dye pot because I can use it.
We have someone, and I'll have a follow-up question for you on this one. Do you and your mother sell mostly tapestries when you do shows?
Yes, people call our work Navajo rugs, but they're so expensive and beautiful. They're not really made for walking on.
Right.
And so we call them tapestries or textiles. And so, yeah, usually these are art pieces that would go on a wall or on a shelf or, someplace, not on the floor. But I did have one piece. It was a beautiful tufting, and it was, very, very delicate on one side. And the tufting was Navajo churro locks, actually. And at one of the art shows we were at, this lady, she bought it, and we said, well, how are you going to display it? And she goes, well, I'm not. It's going to go in my bathroom on the floor. So I said, well, you bought it. You could do what you want with it.
Well, and the follow-up is, I was thinking about, that's such a good question because earlier, we were talking about whether it's art or utilitarian, and, is it wall art or is it a rug? And same thing. I bought a piece, and it's like I will never put it on the floor. It will always be on the wall.
Yeah, a lot of my mom's weaving. She's a bit older, and she had back surgery a few years ago, so she can't do large things like saddle blankets anymore. And so she weaves us smaller pieces that are more manageable for her.
Oh, okay.
And they don't really have a use, but except to be beautiful in people's homes.
Rebecca Mezoff. Hi, Rebecca. She said she grew up in Gallup, so she was curious how the regional styles might have influenced your work. It seems like you're also from that area of New Mexico.
I'm from Farmington area, so big difference. No, I'm kidding. No. Yeah, so on our side over here, near Farmington, we have Shiprock and so on. And so a lot of the styles that people were weaving would be like the eye dazzlers, the serrated diamonds, the yebiche rugs. But my family doesn't do yebiche. A lot of elderly people from around here say not to weave those because you have to have a lot of ceremonies and prayers done for your protection before you weave sacred imagery. So so my family was doing a lot of the eye dazzler stuff, and so that's where I learned from my mother. And then I started taking it in my own way, using what our traditional family designs would have been, and going in my own direction with them. But yeah, I guess today, because people have ease of travel, you can drive anywhere on the res. You can, see people online on Instagram, see other people's work. It's not like it was in the 50s or 60s where, the regional areas were really a big thing, right? Like, where if you're from Two Gray Hills, you only weave Two Gray Hills. If you're from Crystal, you're only weaving Crystal and stuff like that. So today there's sort of a blurred regionalism happening. And a lot of people, I think a lot of weavers are outright deconstructing the regional typology that anthropologists and ethnographers have applied to us.
I bet. Well, this is an interesting question, because it's really becoming more and more an issue. Is that, does the scarcity of water ever present a problem for you for dyeing?
I live in Farmington, New Mexico, where there's multiple rivers, and I live alongside a river. I'm from one of the farming communities close to on Navajo Nation, Fruitland, New Mexico. So we have plenty of water here for now, hopefully. And I know that people that live in the more remote expanses that don't live by rivers or don't have access to running water, it is a big problem for them. But yeah, people have had lots of ways of coping with this for long periods of time. And I know there's some weavers that only dye seasonally or when it rains. So,
Oh, there you go.
they have the privilege of waiting. I don't, because I need colors all the time. And I know that there's people that dig wells and they use well water for dyeing as well. But as you know, the mineral compositions in different water sources can affect the colors. And so they might want that. And, I have very hard water where I come from. So it's a blessing when I do get to use rainwater, especially for cochineal.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, Pamela Grove wants to know, do you give lectures to Weavers Guilds?
I do when I have the time. If people ask and I'm available to travel, I do lectures and talks and things like that.
Oh, that's good. I can't believe we have to stop. It's been an hour.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, time flies when you're yapping, huh?
I'm so glad you were on here today. This has been fun. It's been a delight. I could talk to you for hours, and somebody else said, can we see more artwork? And I'm sorry. We could just do this for hours and just show more and more of your work. Thank you so
Well,
much.
you can go to my Instagram page to see a lot of my work and my process. It's Aragon Textiles. Or if you just type in my name, Venancio Aragon, you can find it. And I do have a website at venancioaragon.com. I haven't updated in a while because I don't have much to sell, but I'm working on that.
So I don't think you said, are you doing any shows? I mean, any exhibits? So if people want to see your work, you got any exhibits coming up in the future that you're aware of?
No, I just there was one in New York that just finished up. It was Tangible Intangible at K Art Gallery in Buffalo. So that one I think is over. But yeah, so now I'm just gonna work for the Herd Museum. That's a big part of my annual income is the Herd Museum and the Santa Fe Indian Market.
Okay, all righty. Well, thank you so much. And again, I want to thank our sponsor today. If you want to see his work, there's his website, Venancio Aragon, not even close.com. Go there and also check out his Instagram page. The work is gorgeous. You'll love it. I do want to thank our sponsors today. It was the Weavers Guild of St. Louis in memory of Dorothy Haddock. Dorothy, I hope you enjoyed this today in your honor. Thank you for sponsoring us, St. Louis. We appreciate it. And if you are interested in sponsoring an episode of Textiles and Tea or your guild or your business, please go to our website at weavespindye.org and you too can be a sponsor of Textiles and Tea. Don't forget our 100 donations before our 100th episode. It's November the 29th. We're trying to do 100 donations of $100 by the 29th. We are up to 36. I forgot to do the thermometer. Sorry. We've got 36 donations. We're chugging along. We'd like to make it to 100. So if you're interested in supporting Textiles and Tea or any of the programs given out by the Handweavers Guild of America, like the Spinning and Weaving Week. Those of you who have joining us who've been in Spinning and Weaving Week for the last 2 days, hasn't it been wonderful? And y'all can still sign up. We still have, you can sign up for all kinds of the classes, and you sign up for the whole week and you get so many things for just your $25 or $50. Spinning Week is pre-recorded also. So even if you sign up now, you can see all the things that you missed. And we'll have, Friday, we'll have the fashion show from Convergence. So if you didn't get to go, or you did go and you would like to see it again, we are going to show that live Friday. Well, not live. We're going to show it Friday night. And so join us, sign up for Textiles and Tea, for Spinning and Weaving Week, and you can watch that Friday. We also are looking for people for the strut your stuff, and it doesn't have to be garments. Bring on that textile that you made and you're not sure what you're going to do with it. Dish towels, flea collars, I don't care. Bring them all. We want to see what you've made. And that will be Saturday. So you still have time to sign up. So if you want to participate in Spinning and Weaving Week, you want to see all the different episodes, you can still join in there. I want to thank you all for being here this week. It was a wonderful episode. I can't wait to watch it again myself. And next week, we're going to have Deborah Silver. So I hope y'all have a wonderful week. We'll see you later on this week in Spinning and Weaving, and have a good week. Happy tea.